Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Rookie Card Collector 123 video. In today's episode, we're going to continue our journey on the road to 310, how I built the most diverse baseball Hall of Fame rookies collection of all time on a budget. And this again was back in the 2004 to 2014 time frame. So obviously things were much more affordable back in those days. And for whatever reason, maybe it's because of the values being so high today, a lot of collectors are holding on to the really key pieces, the really rare stuff. But it just seemed like back then, just about anything you were ever looking for, if you were patient, it would pop up eventually on eBay, auction houses, whatever. Whereas today, it seems to me at least that a lot of the pieces that I've been looking for since I got back into collecting again in 2021, a lot of these pieces just don't come up for sale anymore. And of course, if they do, the price point is very much different than it was 10 or 15 years ago when I built this original collection. So I'm again going to talk to you about my stories of the initial cards I picked up for these Inner Circle Hall of Famers, the really big names. My initial purchase for the rookie collectible in my collection for Hall of Famers, and then how the players' items evolved throughout the 10 years up until the point where I had my final representation in 2014 before I sold all the collectibles. So the first player I'm going to go over today is going to be Stan the Man Musial, very popular amongst lots of vintage baseball collectors. Musial always seems to fall on those lists of most underrated players and most undervalued cards, and I think most deservedly so. I guess it was not having the flashy background of some of the other higher profile players. He just kind of went out every year, batted 300, hit close to 30 home runs, knocked in 100 runs, and was a team leader for the Cardinals from the time he joined the team in the early 40s all the way through the end of his career in the early 60s. So the initial Musial, as you probably could imagine if you've been following all these episodes, the first year I started collecting the rookies back in 2004, I started with the post-war mainstream cards, which was basically Topps and Bowman. Whatever was listed in the Beckett Price Guide with an RC next to it, those are the cards I went after. So from Musial, the obvious one was the 1948 Bowman. Back at that time, I think the Leaf set was still being debated whether it was a 48 or a 49 or maybe both years. Obviously, since then, it's been proven to be a 49. But anyway, I had the 48 Bowman and I had that Musial rookie for a couple of years. And by around 2007, I was looking to get a little more adventurous. And I was looking to kind of do the opposite of how the collection initially started. I was looking to pick up anything other than the mainstream Topps and Bowman cards for the post-war guys as often as possible. So upon looking into that a little bit, I found there was a Musial in the 47 Bond Bread set. That was the larger set. That was not the Jackie Robinson set. But this was a set. I forget how many cards are in it now, maybe 48 or something like that. These are the black and white cards with the rounded or beveled corners. And Musial has one of the few horizontal poses in that set, where I believe he's stretching from his first base position to catch a throw, probably from an infielder. So the Bond Bread Musial presented a little more of a challenge than the 48 Bowman, and back then it was also a lot cheaper. So I found one of those fairly quickly on eBay. They were not that hard to come by. And those are always a concern when it comes to authenticity. There's been some reprints over the years. There's been some people trying to sell square corner versions as opposed to the rounded corners that I mentioned. So that one, in particular, I was only going to buy a graded copy, and SGC was the only grading company back then. I'm not sure about Beckett, but I know PSA would not grade them. So I picked up an SGC graded copy, and with the rounded corners, those are usually not too hard to find in a mid to higher grade as compared to most of my collection, which was usually in the 1 to 2 condition range, if not authentic. So I picked up a Bond Bread Musial. I sold the Bowman, made quite a bit of money on the flip between those two cards because the Bowman was much more expensive at that time, and had my Bond Bread Musial going forward. And a year or so later, a year or two later, doing a little more further research and all, I became aware there was a couple of issues from 46 where Musial appeared. One of them was the Cuban, really rare Cuban set, which was called Propaganda Montiel. Those are cards that have either yellow or orange color borders. They're extremely thin, about the thickness of like a newspaper page type of thing. And they made some U.S. players, and then they made a lot of the Cuban stars who played in the Cuban Winter League in that 46-47 season. And many of the U.S. stars were retired players that were no longer active, guys like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Jimmy Fox had recently retired. And then they had the current greats like Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams, Bob Feller, lots of guys like that. So Musial was in the set. He was in the obviously in the U.S. side, and back then those were, like I said, very rare, and pretty pricey considering the cost of things back at that time. So I decided I was going to go after a Musial, and it took quite a bit of searching, but I finally found one. I think it was on eBay. I paid around $1,000, maybe $800, something like that. And it was not in great condition, as you could imagine, but um, it was 1 year earlier than the Bond Bread card from Musial, which I had. So I sold the Bond Bread, and I had the Propaganda Montiel in my collection. I also knew there was another 46 option. That was a Sports Exchange, which was a baseball magazine or newspaper at the time. And they put out premiums which spanned 4 years from 1946 to 1949. And they did them in 12, I believe it was 12 groups. So every 3 or 4 months, they would put out a new group over those 4 years. Musial, I believe, was in either the first group or the second group. So his card came out, or his premium came out in either 46 or the beginning of 47. So he was kind of in a similar time frame as the Propaganda Montiel, which I already had. But I didn't really need something else from that same time frame. I only collected one item for each player. Otherwise, I couldn't afford to continue the collection. So I was not after that one, not the Sports Exchange W603. But I was aware of a earlier Musial, the earliest catalog Musial item, which was a baseball magazine premium. And those were distributed oftentimes over many years, sometimes over 10 or more years. And over the course of years, different players had multiple variations or multiple different images on these premiums. These were cataloged as M114 beginning around 1920. Prior to 1920, they were even larger size, and those were M113s. And those were really big. Those were about 13 inches long and maybe 10 or 11 inches wide. The M114s were also very large. I believe they're about 8.5 by 11. So anyway, so Musial had a 19, I believe it was 1942 M114 baseball magazine premium. It was either 42 or 43. I forget now which one. But those were super cheap back then. Most of the players outside of maybe like Babe Ruth and a couple of other super high end players, most of them you could pick up for $20 to $40, somewhere around there. So I decided if I sold my Propaganda Montiel Musial, that was pretty substantial money, and I could pick up this baseball magazine premium for probably not more than $50 or so. So I decided I was going to do that, and that would free up a nice chunk of money I could use again on some of the other rare Negro League guys and stuff like that, where there might only be one option for me to go after, and I might need as much money as I can get my hands on to try to get those. So I sold the Propaganda Montiel Musial. I picked up a baseball magazine, M114. And at that time, Beckett was the only grading company, and I think up till today, they're the only grading company still that has holders large enough to fit those. And I was able to have my Musial graded. I think it graded a one or a two. So ultimately, that would be my final Stan Musial in the collection when I sold everything in 2014, the 1942 baseball magazine premium oversized item. Okay, so next player we're going to talk about is Jim Rice. So now we're going to switch to a more modern 70s, 80s guy. Jim Rice, of course, as you probably can imagine, when I started the collection, I picked up his 75 tops. There was also a Topps Mini version, which is also available pretty readily. Scarcer than the regular issue, but easy enough to find if I wanted to go after that one instead. But I opted for the regular Topps. So I had that rice in my collection for several years. And maybe around 2009 or so, I started to get more into the foreign issues. Foreign issues being cards that were issued in Latin America mainly, countries like the Cuba, Puerto Rico, Venezuela. And after doing some research, I discovered that Jim Rice had a card in the Venezuelan League Winter League set, which was a 73 to 74 card. And of course, my Topps rookie was from 75. So again, if I could pick up this Jim Rice, that gives me something 2 years older than the Topps rookie. And also at that time, I was looking for things much more challenging than just the mainstream Topps and Bowman. So killed two birds with one stone, and it was a big plus. Well, the Venezuelan rice was not that easy to find, but at that time it was around $300 or $400, and I was fortunate enough to pick one up on eBay at one point somewhere along the way. So I sold my Topps Jim Rice, which probably netted me about $20 maybe, and the Venezuelan cost me quite a bit more. But I was okay with it. It was a 2 years earlier Jim Rice item, and I never really expected to ever get anything earlier than that for Rice. But one day I used to do searches on eBay, just random various things. I used to look for team postcards, team photos, Negro League items, things like that. So one day my team photo search pulled up an item. It said Jim Rice was pictured, and it was from 1971. So, reading the description and looking closer at the pictures, it was described as a 71 American Legion Jim Rice team photo. And Jim Rice I believe he was 17 years old at that point. Um, it was probably some sort of a town ball team, maybe Babe Ruth League or something. But I think American Legion is its own league. But anyway, it's an amateur team before he was drafted or anything, 1971, and definitely looked like it was Jim Rice. So I did a little research into Rice, and somewhere along the way of reading biographies and stuff, online info, I came across that team. So I was able to verify that he played on that team, and the player in the photo was in fact Rice. So I decided, 71 being 2 years earlier than my Venezuelan league, Jim Rice sticker, that I would pick it up. And it was not expensive at all. I think it was under $100. And the Rice Venezuelan at that point had gone up higher, so it was several $100s, maybe getting close to 1,000 even. So I sold my Venezuelan League Rice. I picked up the American Legion baseball Type 1 photo, team photo. And that is the final Jim Rice version that I would have when I liquidated the collection. So again, just from today, two more unique types of things, that I had as representations for my Hall of Famers. the Jim Rice American Legion Type 1 photo, and then the Stan Musial, the M114 baseball magazine premium, which was about 8.5 by 11. Okay, the next one I'm going to talk about is Jackie Robinson, and this is a real interesting one. So, um, beginning of the collection, the Jackie Robinson, and again, back then, his cards have gone up probably more than almost any other post-war player since the boom of COVID in 2021 and all. So Jackie Robinson cards back in the 2004 timeframe when I was starting the collection were not all that expensive like they are today. So the first Jackie Robinson I ended up picking up was the Leaf card. I was looking for either well, actually, at the time, the Leaf was considered 48 or 48, 49, so it was a year earlier than the Bowman. So my preference was to get a Leaf rather than the Bowman. So I was able to pick up a Leaf. It was probably somewhere in the 1,200, something like that kind of range. So it was one of the more expensive ones that I had to pick up initially for the post-war Hall of Fame rookies, but it wasn't too crazy. So I picked up the Leaf rookie, had that in the collection for a while. And again, 2 or 3 years later, I'm starting to venture away from the more mainstream stuff to the regional issues and anything more obscure and rarer. And I come across or I start seeking out a Bond bred Jackie. And I knew he had a card in the big Bond bred set, the 48 card set, I think it is. That's the one with the rounded corners. But I also became aware on Net54, somebody had posted a lot of photos and research and documentation that there was another Jackie Robinson, a similar portrait to the Bond Bread card, but it's different. It's not identical. It's a different portrait of him. And then beyond that, they also produced 13 in-action Jackie Robinson cards in that Bond Bread set. At that time, the entire 13 card set was categorized as being 1947. Due to later research where a lot of the original photos, the Type 1 photos that were used to make that 13 card set, a lot of those photos were able to be pinned down to later seasons like 48, 49, and I believe even a couple from 1950. So that set got recategorized, and the only card that's definitively 1947 as of today is the portrait with the facsimile signature on it. All the rest are, a couple of them were probably 47. Several of them were 48. Several of them were 49, like I said. So I decided I was going to look for the portrait, and I found one that was pretty costly at the time, but I was also going to get back a nice chunk of money when I sold my Leaf card. So it was kind of almost a washout. I probably saved a little bit by buying the Bond Bread because the example I bought was in really rough shape. It had multiple creases. I think it had some paper loss in one of the bottom corners. Barely deserved a 1, but it was a 47 and it was predating the Leaf by a year. So I picked up the Bond Bread portrait and had that for quite a while. And again, as I got more into the Negro League material and the foreign issues and things like that, I was also aware that there was an earlier Jackie cataloged item, which was from 1946, the year before the Bond Bread issue. And this was still MLB professional baseball, but it was after he signed with the Dodgers. He did not go straight to the majors. He went and spent the season in Montreal with the Royals, which was the Dodgers farm team, AAA equivalent. So he would play there in 1946 before coming up with the Dodgers in 47, April 15th. So Jackie's season in Montreal, obviously in Canada, so now this becomes a foreign issue, which I was fine with. I was collecting a lot of those at this point with the Negro League players that I needed. So the Montreal Royals put out a series of, I guess you'd call them premiums. They were not as large as some of the premiums that were like 8 by 10 or 8.5 by 11. These were more like maybe 6 by 8 or 6 by 9, something like that. but definitely oversized. They were not cards. And they pictured, I think there was about 18 of them in the set, something like that. Most of them were pretty obscure. Most of those guys never made the major leagues. One or two of them did play in the Negro Leagues. I know Roy Partlow was in that set. He played in the Negro Leagues. Not sure if he ever made the majors at all. If he did, it was not a long major league career. But Jackie Robinson is in this Montreal set, and it's put out by I believe it was a newspaper. It could have been a magazine company. It's called Parade Sportive, and obviously they focused on sports figures from that day. I believe they were out of Quebec, so it was a Canadian issue. And baseball, of course, not being nearly as popular as hockey in Canada. So there was not a lot of these printed. They were very short supply. Parade Sportive, right around the same time, also put out the same type of premiums for the Montreal Canadiens. And of course, hockey being in Canada so much more popular, they produce more of the Canadians, and those are easier to find than the Montreal Royals. But anyway, so there's a jockey out there from this set, and it's going to be cheaper than the Von Brad or the Leaf rookies because it's a minor league set. People at that time were not necessarily looking for the player's first ever quote unquote card. They were really looking for the major league rookie. So I was able to find one of those Parade Sportives for less than the Bond bread. So I sold the Bond bread. I picked up the Parade Sportive, and that was in 1946, and had that in my collection for probably 2 or 3 years or so. And of course, the only thing earlier than that, I was not really going to go back to like college days or military items or anything because Jackie, played at UCLA. He was in the U.S. military. But the only thing earlier professional baseball related would have been a 45 Kansas City Monarchs. So at one point, I picked up a second Jackie item. It was actually 1946. It was a Negro League Baseball yearbook. Now, the same way Major League Baseball every season would put out like Street and Smith or whoever the publisher was at the time, they put out an annual yearbook where they would have coverage of all the different teams, lots of photographs, players, previous year stats, all that kind of stuff. Well, Negro League Baseball had the same thing. And 1946's issue had Jackie Robinson on the cover because he was a big star in 45 for the Kansas City Monarchs. But again, it was a 46 issue, so it was the same year as the Parade Sportive, but I just happened to have that item as well. So I set out to keep my eye. I didn't really expect to ever pick up anything earlier than the Parade Sportive, but always keeping my eyes open. And at one point, a die-cut Type 1 photo of Jackie in the Kansas City Monarchs uniform came up for auction. And it was mounted, it was one of the newspaper archives. It might have been the Sporting News. It was mounted on a white backing. It was, like I said, a die-cut Type 1 photo, so a crystal clear image. And he was kind of like standing in the on-deck circle, it looked like, getting ready to bat, but it was a full-length pose. And really nice image of Jackie. And again, it was 1945 because that was his only season with the Kansas City Monarchs. So I decided I would go after that one, which would again predate my Parade Sportive by 1 year, and was fortunate enough to win that Type 1 Jackie item in the auction. So I sold my Parade Sportive, and that was my Jackie Robinson representation all the way up to the end of the collection. So I was going to try to cover one more player, but we're almost 25 minutes in the video today now, so I'm going to cut off the video at this point, and we'll start off next episode with a really big player and some really interesting stories with that player as well. So anyway, hope you enjoyed today's video. Have a great day, and I'll catch you guys again on the next one.